Okay, we're live.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I will tell you that I was ill prepared for the response that we got and interest in doing this. So I certainly appreciate everyone that has joined us in the meeting here, and those of you who are watching live stream as well. So just a reminder to everyone in the room, it is being live streamed on our YouTube channel as well. I just want to address real quick kind of the reason for numbers. I originally thought I would try to keep a smaller contained group so we could have more back and forth conversation, but obviously the interest level was there, so we started to add spots. This is a real important time for us because we have been wanting to hear from parents and talk to parents, and unfortunately we just haven't had the guidance and enough of a framework to bring forward to have dialogue about. So really that's the purpose of us doing these over the next 3 or 4 days. We will be launching a survey to all parents on Wednesday of next week. We do anticipate the governor at the state level announcing official guidance on Tuesday afternoon in his press conference. So this is evolving and changing, and an opportunity in time where if we didn't engage with our parents now, we wouldn't have time to. We need to get a finalized plan in place by mid-July, because there's going to be a lot of things that need to be worked through, from facilities and moving furniture to preparing schedules and getting ready for opening of school. So I appreciate the great response. I look forward to hearing from you, today and as well through the survey, as that will really kind of drive what we're doing. So just real quickly, the meeting kind of format and structure, as we've changed a little bit due to the higher numbers. We're going to kind of present for, I hope, 25-30 minutes. While we're presenting, if you have questions along the way, I think if you go down in your left-hand corner, you'll see an option in the chat box. You go ahead and put whatever questions you want in there. And after our presentation, I have Mike Doherty on, as well as Jen Banco, both administrators in the district, that will help kind of facilitate those questions. And when we get through those questions on the chat, if we have some time left, we'll open it up for conversation in terms of additional questions. So if we're ready to go, Mr. Doherty, can you just give the directions on how to raise your hand, so when we get to that point, so we don't have 40 people trying to click on their mic at the same time?
Helps if I unmute myself. Sure. If you just click the participants window on the lower part of your screen, it'll pop up on the right-hand side, and there's a little button that says raise hand. When you do that, I get a little notification on my screen that lets me know that you have your hand up, and we'll do our best to call on you. If you want to take your hand down, simply click the button that says lower hand, and it will take it back down. Again, as Dr. Hunt said, please use the chat for questions. It makes it very easy for us to see what's going on.
Thanks, Mike. So obviously, this is a difficult time for everyone, both personally and professionally, not only locally, but across our nation and around the globe. The obvious problem that we're facing, and framing that problem from a school perspective, is COVID-19 and the lack of guidance, which we'll talk a little bit about from the state level. So we are going to share with you kind of how we're addressing that, the work we've done thus far, and the work we will do over the next month to get to a final plan, and certainly solicit your feedback. The other issues is that, unfortunately, that's not the only issue the district is facing. As many of you know, we were scheduled to be on the ballot in November for 7.9 mills. We don't think that's a reasonable ask of our community under the current economic situation. So the board has spent a lot of time over the last 2 to 3 months looking at what might be the best option to go forward. So we've got revenue challenges. We received a state cut of $534,000 in this initial budget. We were able to work with Senator Dolan to get that get some relief to that, so that number's down to about $140,000. But we do anticipate additional cuts to our state funding coming into next year. So it's a little bit of the perfect storm. And then you add COVID-19 in terms of preparation and cost to get ready for students. It's been a very multi-tiered, multi-leveled complex problem to solve. And a really important, part of the solution is going to be the feedback we hear from parents, not only today, but in the survey that we launch next week. So that helps frame the problem a little bit. If you're an Apollo 13 fan, I did a lot of analogies with our board in talking through this, but that's kind of how I think we feel administratively, where we're caught in space and we need to figure out how to reopen. If you know anything about that movie, they essentially needed to figure out how you get a square peg through a round hole, and that's kind of how we feel right now. There are many challenges to this, depending on the guidance as it's being finalized. There are a variety of ways to skin the cat, but the cat doesn't like any of them. There's no perfect hybrid model that doesn't impact our families and our parents and our educators as well. So we're really trying to be as creative as possible, keep the needs of our students in mind, providing the best educational experience we can, but also very cognizant that this has an impact at home, and we need to be, well aware of that and take it into consideration. So, today is about sharing where we're at. It's not about me saying, here's your final model, this is where we're going. It's just me sharing kind of an update on the work that's been done in the district thus far. So just to give you an idea about the complexity of the problem, we've got kind of three components to consider into this. You got the public health considerations. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the guidance from the state level, the timeline on that in a minute, but the considerations of the 6 feet social distancing, wearing of cloth face masks, potential face coverings, minimizing transitions in building, keeping cohorts of students together, providing alternate ways of serving lunch or serving students, and then dealing with challenges of any, that on a normal basis in a school where you bring any large groups together, how do you mitigate or manage those things? And then there's the educational considerations as well. So we heard from parents in surveys, students, need face-to-face interaction. One of the things from the first survey we heard very quickly was they need to see their teachers, they need to interact. So we tried to improve that as we were going through the virtual model. Student interaction with peers is obviously important. We want to continue to provide high quality instruction, and we see a benefit in in-person elective offerings as well. And the other educational consideration is whatever the state of Ohio comes out with and says this is what the parameters that you have to work in, that obviously has to play into it. And then there's the important community considerations as well. Families and parents need a reliable school schedule. They need to rely on schools for childcare. There's different circumstances that each family is facing. Whether you have an autoimmune issue in your home or a health consideration in your home. And then this community deserves a high quality education on a regular basis, even in the toughest of times. And that's what we're working to try to provide to every single student. So just to help frame maybe some of the parameters and why we've been a little bit radio silent, since the ending of school. Around May 15th, and these are approximate days, around May 15th, it was shared with schools that there was going to be an announcement regarding guidance for the reopening of school, which prompted, we were already starting to talk about what it could look like in a COVID reality. So we had already started those conversations internally. So around May 22nd, a draft guidance document was released from the Ohio Department of Education. And I think this was floated in a way to hear feedback from parents and from educators on the feasibility of being able to open school under those draft guidance. So in there, it was about a 30-page document, but probably the most important things are it required 6 feet social distancing at all time. And I use the word required. It required masks on every staff member and every student all day. It intimated to a 24 maximum number of students on a bus, and the importance of cleaning and sanitation requirements. There's also requirements having alternative locations to place students that may have fever symptoms or staff members that have those symptoms. temperature checking, things of that nature. So that was floated, and it was said that was going to be out for a week for feedback, and then it was going to be returned and finalized and given to schools by June 1st so they could create their plans. So from June 1st to June 22nd, we've heard multiple dates on when it's going to be released, and obviously none of those dates have been held. June 22nd, we were informed that the guidance is forthcoming on June 30th. We know the governor's current order regarding schools ends June 30th, so something has to be done, and we believe we'll have that guidance next week. So that has, without understanding parameters, it's been very difficult to create solutions to a problem. But I just felt beginning of last week that we needed to start the conversation with our parents now before that guidance got out, because we need to get a model approved by the board and work with our board on what we're going to do, so we know kind of the direction we're going as a school district for all the things that we have to do, but also so our parents know exactly where we're going. And so they can make, appropriate child care arrangements if that is necessary. So I'm not going to read these slides. They're in here. I want them on the recording so people can look. We've obviously been working on, two sides. There's the educational side of this, and there's the getting our facilities ready. I want you to know that we are looking at, sanitation and cleaning and disinfecting and the appropriate processes and protocols and chemicals to use in that regard. So there's some things here. There's also some work we're doing with our HVA systems regarding air circulation as well. We're also in the business of procuring product right now, hand sanitizer, gloves, masks, those types of things. We're looking at, touchless faucets, what we're doing with our water fountains. All of that work is ongoing as well. And I think it's just important for you to kind of be aware of that as a community and as parents, that we are going to do the best we can to provide the safest environment as possible. So again, not going to read that to you, but thought it was important for you to know. I know I get extremely frustrated in early June with all of the unknowns. It became almost overwhelming, and I felt like we were spinning our wheels because our administrative team was working so hard on creating models that were going to then be turned over to design teams and buildings without any knowledge. And I kind of had to come to the conclusion I need to focus on what we know. So this model was based on, the model that we'll share with you today was based on what we know as of today and what we knew at the time. And we made the decision to design it on the most strictest or stringent of restrictions. So those original guidelines. I will tell you, I've heard, I guess the sense I get from the change in the revisions that have been happening over the last couple of weeks are going to change, I think, from recommendations or mandates to suggestions. And local boards of education are going to be in a position where they have to make decisions on what is appropriate. And obviously part of that decision is largely in the feedback that we receive from our parents. Certainly from conversations we have today, but definitely from the survey that we'll release next week. So here, this is what we know so far. We know school is going to restart. It's an economic reality that we need to come back. We know that COVID-19 will still exist and that we likely are not going to have a vaccine. We also know Cuyahoga County is the highest number of cases or second highest number of cases in the state of Ohio. Second to Franklin County down in Columbus. We obviously need to consider safety precautions, social distancing and cleaning. And we also know that we have to prepare three kind of learning realities or through learning models. We understand there are parents that are going to make the decision that they're not comfortable in returning their students until a vaccine is here. We understand there are students that have health concerns or parents that have health concerns that prevent their children from coming to school. So we know we need a remote learning opportunity for those students, and it has to coincide with either the all-in model that we have or the blended model. So those students are educated as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We need to be able to be very fluid and flexible, and I would just tell you as parents right now, I know when we flipped on a dime and we closed schools within a week, that was a tremendous challenge for all parents. I would keep that reality in your mind, because if there is a local outbreak, or if there are, a number of cases that happen in a certain building, we could have to close down a building at any moment and go into the remote learning model. So we have to be flexible and fluid in doing this. We also know that we will have additional technology. We imagine, mid-September, based on when we were able to order, we are going to have better technology in classrooms to provide more authentic, real instruction for those that are in the virtual model. And when I say in the virtual, that's the people that choose an all remote option, and those that are, if we're in a hybrid model as well. So we've worked very hard. We certainly appreciate the support and hard work of our staff in, this spring, but we know that we need to improve what we offer in that remote environment when we come back. Part of that's an infrastructure technology piece that has been taken care of. And part of that is training and time for our teachers to do that work, which we'll talk a little bit about. What we don't know is we don't have the federal and state guidelines yet. We have, certainly talked, with our staff, but we haven't, surveyed our staff in quite a while, and we haven't heard from our parents, which we're doing now. And what the future months look like. I know we're, in the midst of a spike right now. So we don't know, where this is going to go moving forward. So quickly on our process, we obviously surveyed our parents twice while in the virtual environment, and took that feedback into not only trying to modify what we're offering this spring, but to really serve as guidance to not only our model that we're going to offer, but any professional development we need to do. Probably early mid-May, administratively in cabinet, we started to create a variety of models, a variety of iterations for consideration. We wanted our principals and our teachers to stay focused on what they were doing with kids. But we knew this, this work had to be done. So after school let out, immediately after that, each building had a design team made up of teachers and administrators. We provided those options and those guiding principles to those teams, and they worked on those models. And where you see the arrow on this graph is where we're at right now. We've shared a proposed model that's based on the most stringent of restrictions with the Board of Education, and we're now sharing it with the survey, or with the community, and we plan on surveying the community for feedback next week. So after the 4th of July, we'll get all of that information, the feedback from our parents. We'll bring it to obviously our administrative team and bring a recommendation to the Board of Education. The other thing I do want to point out here is there are conversations regarding our school calendar. At one point, we actually considered moving up to go with a college model where you're looking at that longer break between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We just don't think that's a reality with the things we need to get into the district to open school. So we are considering now potentially moving the start date back a little bit to provide time to get our teachers in here, get them settled, and get ready. We'll have a hearing on that calendar at our next board meeting, which is July 8th. There's no firm decision on that right now. So I just want to quickly go through, I'm not going to read these to you, but the guiding principles, we started at a high level and said, okay, what are the guiding, beliefs that we have regarding a plan? And obviously safety and well-being of our students, staff, and community is our most important responsibility. Critical partnership must exist. This is a time where we have to communicate and interact to come up with the best possible option in a very difficult situation. There's been a lot of talk and conversation about not only the academic side, but the social emotional competencies and components. So we believe very strongly, whatever model our students are in, where, whenever, we need to have that at the forefront of our thinking. We know that this has very unique challenges in this environment, and it impacts our families in very different ways. So a family that has both parents working, this impacts them very differently than maybe a parent that can be at home. And then we've constantly tried to find opportunity in this and hope that we are growing as educators. So when we get to the other side of this, we don't go back to the way things were. We're actually infusing some of the things we've learned through this to be better as educators. So those were our beliefs. Our core, our models that we are preparing, obviously a full day model. That is a model where we would offer education to all students. We bring all students into the buildings. That would be with obviously cleaning and sanitizing requirements. Schedules would be revised to limit transition from classroom to classroom, and lunches would likely be provided in classrooms or small group settings. We are looking and working through room configurations to create as much social distancing as possible, putting up trifolds for students or plexiglass to separate students as well. I need to be as transparent and honest. If we went with a full day all-in model and the vast majority of our students came up, we would not be able to hit a 6 feet social distancing requirement. That's just an unrealistic expectation based on our facilities and our numbers and the way we're structured. That's one model. The remote learning model, even we've talked about, this is the student who either chooses because they have personal health concerns or just in general concerns about exposure, and the parents make the decision to keep the students at home. I've talked about the technology improvements that we're making and the professional development to improve that model. That would include both synchronous instruction, that's kind of live stream teacher to student, and asynchronous, which is more of probably what you saw in the spring, some recordings where students would watch. And then the most complex and the most difficult is the hybrid model. And this is a model where if we're required or if we decide we need to meet 6 feet social distancing, we can bring in about 50% of our students on any given day in our buildings. And this is the most complex. And I would tell you, we've have well over 30 iterations. We've looked at everything from half day to every other day. We looked at keeping our secondary students virtual and spreading our elementaries throughout the entire district. So there's a litany of models that we kind of vetted and went through. And what we're presenting today is what we think from an educational standpoint has the most merit. I think we feel pretty solid about the elementary model and secondary structure and framework. But I think we need to look at secondary to try to figure out a way to get more time, more instructional minutes. So I think, it's important for you to note that these are certainly drafts. They give you an idea for the right conversation, but some things need to change and be tweaked along the way. And, obviously, when we give the survey on Wednesday, you'll be able to weigh in on, the half day every model. I love that because, teachers and students get to be together, or that's just not feasible for us. We can't make that work. I'd like an AB model. That's something you can provide feedback on in the survey on Wednesday. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to let Mike and Jen talk you through the 3 models as they stand now. Again, please know that the tremendous amount of work and time went into these, but they still need to be flushed out and worked through when we make kind of final decisions in the direction that we're going. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Mike and Jen.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt. So what you're looking at right now is the Gurney Elementary model. You'll see the screen continues to change because one of the things about this model, and you'll see this in the intermediate school too, is that the encore block actually rotates through the days. So this would be done by grade level. So the way this model works is pretty simple. We have Cuyahoga County students coming in the morning, half day, and Geauga County students coming in half day in the afternoon. So they would come in Cuyahoga County kids would come in the morning. They would get 90 minutes of literacy and 60 minutes of math. What we like about this model is doing this allows us to get students in every day in front of their teacher. This model avoids lunch and recess, which are both high health risk situations. And it also provides us the opportunity to bring in students for intervention and special needs. We're actually able to bring them all day and bring them in for an all day situation in this model. When the students are not in, they're at home working on science and social study lessons that would be posted on Google Classroom. They would also be working on their iReady and online reading pathways. Yeah, Bob, can you forward one slide so you can see it from a student's perspective? So this would be the student who's a Cuyahoga County student. They would come in the morning, they would arrive between 8:30 and 8:40. They would then go into that literacy block. There's a 10-minute kind of class building activity, then into math, then pack up and head home. While that's happening, the Geauga student would be at home working on science and social studies, working on their iReady pathways, things like that, and then they would switch. In this particular sample, you'll see that Encore would have then happened on Friday for the student. So during that time, Encore would happen. The other thing about this limits transitions down to, I think, only 3 transitions a day, which again is great for the health and safety of the students. Bob, can we look at the intermediate school? So the intermediate school chose a similar model. Again, Cuyahoga County students in the morning, Geauga County students in the afternoon. One big thing to note about the intermediate school model is it does start school quite a bit earlier. So students would actually be arriving at 7:20, which I think is almost an hour earlier than traditionally. But similar model, they come in, they're going to get their announcements. They'll have 2 academic blocks with a break in between. One big difference in this model is the students that are at home will be receiving face-to-face teacher-led science and social studies. So we'll have teachers dedicated to teaching science and social studies to students while they're at home. Additionally, kids at home will have ELA work to complete. Just like at the Gurney model, there's a building transition right around noon. So no lunch, no recess here. We bring the Geauga County kids in, Cuyahoga County kids go in the go home for the afternoon. Similar to Gurney as well, this rotates Encore through. We didn't do the rotating graphic here, but Encore would rotate through Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday so that those students would get those Encore activities. And just like Gurney, students with intervention or special needs could potentially be in for a longer period of time on any day in order to serve those students. Bob, if you move forward, we can look at a sampled intermediate school schedule as well. So here's a Geauga County student. So in the morning, they would have that face-to-face led instruction from their science and social studies teachers over Zoom. They'll also have some ELA work to complete. Then around 11, they'll make the transition. They'll arrive at school at 11:20, and they'll get that face-to-face time with their teacher to do ELA and math. So I'm going to go ahead and move it over to Jen. Jen's going to talk about the 712 model.
Good morning, everybody. Mike has to fix our technology here.
Sorry.
Okay. So I'm going to walk you through the proposed schedules for the middle school and the high school. And as Dr. Hunt said, these secondary schedules are still under review because we're balancing so many different types of student schedules, so many courses. It really gives the most complex problem to solve in terms of scheduling. I know a lot of people in the chat are already asking about whether or not high school students will be able to change their schedules. And all I can say is we don't know yet, to be honest. We really need to finalize our model, balance our classes. We don't know whether or not every class, for example, band, how that will be offered, what that will look like. So as soon as we get our model in place, we'll be able to make the determination of how and when students can make any schedule changes they need to make. Okay, so jumping through the middle school schedule, middle school and high school schedules are aligned. As you know, we have some teachers that service both buildings, so it's important that these buildings kind of work in tandem together. Both buildings would operate on more of a block schedule going across the week. So again, these students are going to come to school for middle school and high school 4 days a week, half of a day. So a middle school student would arrive in the morning. They're going to go to 2 classes each day, basically, with Wednesdays being a day of attendance. But rather than going to a class, it is a flexible learning time, much like the WIN period was for students in our traditional schedule. So it's a time for social emotional curriculum, college and career readiness, intervention groups, enrichment activities, team building, and all of those other important parts of the curriculum for students. Just like the other buildings, intervention and special education services, we have the flexibility to provide those across the entire day. So some students may be offered a full day of programming based on their needs. That may be every day, it may be 1 extra day a week. And then the advisory period, again, is another part of the middle school schedule to work on kind of really building those key relationships and supporting the social emotional growth of students. Can you advance to the next slide? So here would be a Cuyahoga County 7th grader showing you when they would arrive at school, what their morning would look like each day, And then when they get home, the expectation for the middle school student would be that they would have up to 2 classes at home. Now, these are 75-minute blocks. The expectation is not that they are going to necessarily sit on Zoom watching their algebra class for their full 75 minutes. The teacher is going to be managing a group of students in classroom and at home. So there will be a schedule for that remote learning time whereby the students may check in partway through the 75-minute block so that they can have live instruction with their teacher. So we don't know yet. That's part of the professional development with teachers in terms of how we set up that 75-minute block so that students are engaged both live in the classroom as well as in a remote setting. Okay, if you want to flip to the high school schedule. Can we advance to the next slide? I don't have it. There we go.
I'm sorry, is this the one?
The high school schedule, when we get there, will look a lot like the middle school schedule at first glance. They too are basically running a 75-minute class period with 2 core classes being offered each day. Wednesdays, whereas in the middle school schedule, students still came in for their half day on Wednesday. Wednesday would be a full remote day for high school students. One of the things we're trying to balance at the high school level is really giving students some flexibility in their day, in their schedule, kind of starting to prepare them for that college model of needing to be at school when you have class, needing to maybe balance going to class once a week with at-home work. But we do recognize that learning for an incoming 9th grader is different than a senior. So we're trying to kind of make sure that we still have as much in-person, face-to-face instruction with students. And at the same time, we know from our survey data that even through the 12th grade level, students prioritize time with their teachers and time with peers as the 2 most important components of their day. The nuance at the high school relative to the middle school is in that remote learning time. So Bob, if you can advance to the next slide. When you're a high school student and you're in remote learning, you will be live streaming with your class for virtually the entire time. So our technology is going to allow us for those students at home to be tuned into the full instructional period. And if you think about, if you take a step back and you look at all models across all buildings, you can see that the expectation for that at-home remote learning increases developmentally across the ages. So a high school student, we are expecting that they can sit and attend to a 75-minute class period, whereas at middle school, it might be 45 minutes. And then if you go down to the younger grades, it drops off. So we know that students cannot engage for extended amounts of time without having some interaction. So just kind of concluding with the high school schedule, this would be a sample schedule for a student in Geauga County attending in the afternoon and doing their remote classes in the morning. Students at the high school would have an open campus policy whereby they would only need to be in the building when they are expected to be in class. Okay, I think I'm done.
So just, obviously the hybrid model is the one that is the most complex.
You're muted, Bob.
Am I coming through?
We can't hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. You can hear me now? Somebody? Okay, thank you. Lunch and recess poses a big concern for us, and this model kind of is a workaround for that large gathering. Obviously, if we went to a every other day model, that is something we would have to resolve and address, going forward. We compared, especially at the elementary, which I think is a little more refined at this point. We increased the instructional time at the elementary level compared to another model. more repetition and frequency of instruction. So being able to see teachers with kids every single day, not being off on a Thursday and potentially not seeing your teacher again until Monday or Tuesday is this model kind of alleviates that. And then really time for targeted intervention and special education services. So these are our at-risk students that need a little more support, and or our students with special needs that we have are mandated by law to provide additional support for. And the model builds opportunities to continue to build relationships with students and peers. So a lot of the things that we heard in this original surveys that we did regarding, face time with teachers, instructional time, relationships with peers, really kind of served in the creation of these models. So those are kind of what we're proposing or what is out there as of now for consideration. I can guarantee you of one thing, what we presented is not what will happen in the fall. This will tweak, it will change. Your feedback is important in that process. There are a lot of things, logistics that needs to still, and details that need to be kind of worked through. So next steps in our work, and then I want to get to answering questions. I've mentioned a few different times now, we're going to survey parents. We anticipate that going out on Wednesday because of the governor's announcement on Tuesday. We're going to encourage that all of our parents, please, take the time to do that. We're going to ask this group to reach out to your social network and stress the importance of it. Because these percentages matter. If I have 10% of our students that want a remote learning option, that is one model. If I have 30% that want a remote learning option, that's a completely different situation and model. I can transport more students, I can bring more students in. So really important to get the feedback from parents. I would not consider this survey to be committal at this point, although we're going to ask you to kind of identify your child's name because we want to make sure we have a high percentage in terms of people responding. I think it's premature to ask you to commit to anything right now, but it certainly will be used to help kind of make final decisions. We'll continue to discuss calendar modifications, present a recommendation to the board and work through this with the board, prepare facilities and transportation, and then continue to refine elementary and secondary models as well. So that's a lot to get through very quickly, and it's a lot to take in. I want to get to some of the questions. Mike and Jen, if you want to maybe kind of talk me through. I don't have the chat open.
Sure. And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, Bob, that I didn't cover in the hybrid model, is that the other big thing we like about bringing kids in every day is the retention, especially for the younger students. So by bringing them in every day, they're able to retain that information much better, as opposed to like an A/B model. The concern is that teachers would spend a lot of time reviewing work with kids. So that was one of the other things that I did not mention when we were going through the K6 models. So questions. Hang on.
While you're looking at that, we missed a big piece that certainly factors in. To pull off the hybrid model, a half-day model, we are likely, depending on what parents respond in the survey regarding transportation, we're likely going to be eliminating transportation at the high school campus, 10 through 12, potentially 9 through 12. But again, that's a question and that's a data piece that you will be asked to respond to, whether you're going to leverage transportation next year or not.
Hey, Bob, there was a question about, for infection mitigation, would it be possible to explore a model where a group of students attend class for one full week and then do remote learning the following week? Did you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually had that conversation at one point, and it was especially difficult with the younger students to have that much disconnect from teachers. And what we learned about kind of remote learning with our elementary students, that model sinks very quickly in terms of our ability to effectively educate.
There was another question that came up about how our plans compare to other districts like Orange and Hudson. If you want to speak to that.
I would tell you that, I've talked to these individuals, daily. I actually spoke to the superintendent in Orange this morning. Um, I think everyone is in the same boat with what they're considering. I would say that we're probably out front in terms of releasing something to the public to talk about. Um, uh, Remember, space matters in this. So if I have a lot more square footage in buildings and I can spread students out more, I might be able to bring more kids in. But when you look at hybrid, if you kind of make the decision you can't bring all kids in, there's only 2 or 3 different ways to really kind of accomplish this. And they've already been mentioned as we've gone through this.
All right. Bob, do you want to talk a little bit more about, actually, there's 2 here that would be great. Do you want to touch on athletics at the high school level? And then also just what a full online, kind of more about what our virtual model would look like?
Yeah, I mean, some of this is to be defined, on the virtual side. And Mike, you've had some of these conversations as well. We've gone everywhere from designating certain teachers to being the virtual teachers, to live streaming along out of classrooms. So I'll throw that back to you and Jen if you've had some of those deeper conversations in the virtual side. In terms of athletics, I mean, part of the challenge is is trying to wrap yourself around what's acceptable and not by the state right now. So, the NFL is, hesitant to bring people back or, doing all of these things. But the Ohio High School opens wide up and we're open. So, last week, initially in June, they introduced these phases that we would have to go through with athletics. It started with small groups and you had to be, do that for so many days and you could transition to phase 2. Well, last week, they just catapulted everybody into phase 2. So it seems like the message from the Ohio High School is kind of full steam ahead right now. So that's the guidance we have. When you look at, what is allowed now versus what is not, it's very frustrating. And, a key point here is our model is, we can create whatever model we think is great. The Cuyahoga County Department of Health and the Geauga County Department of Health are going to weigh in and approve the models. So we have that hurdle to cross with whatever we create as well. And there is a real inconsistency from county to county. So I'll give you an example. Playgrounds are now open with a requirement to clean them every 2 hours, clean and sanitize them every 2 hours. Well, we didn't have the staff to open our playgrounds to do that. I was expressing that in a meeting as a concern to superintendents. Superintendent in Lake County said, well, we just posted a sign and said, basically, play at your own risk. That was approved by the health department. I sent the same sign over to Cuyahoga County and it was rejected. So there's a real inconsistency county to county. We've voiced that at the state level. So hopefully with return to school plans, there's a little more consistency. Mike and Jen, I don't know if you want to jump in on the virtual side a little bit more.
Yeah, so one of the things that we heard from the feedback in the spring was that the spring worked well, but we really wanted more interaction with the teachers. So what we're looking at when we adjust our virtual model is to more of a synchronous live streaming kind of model where the teacher would connect with students over Zoom in a real-time face-to-face model. So the instruction wouldn't be, hey, I recorded a video and I posted it. No, it'd actually be you meeting with your teacher on a set schedule. We heard very clearly through the surveys that we needed more of a schedule as well. So there would be a scheduled time when you would meet online with your teacher and they would go through either new instruction or answer questions that were going on, but it would definitely be more of that face-to-face one-to-one communication or one-to-many communication as opposed to just posting videos. We're doing a lot of PD with our staff in the fall to get them prepared for that so that they can adjust lessons accordingly so that they can make sure that what they're doing better fits kind of a blended model than what we did in the spring. Bob, I want to go back to a question that came up, and the question was, is it possible to bring in the elementary students all day, every day, just knowing the challenges that some people have in childcare and attention spans and things like that? So did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give a very clear answer that's maybe. So if there's 2 paths that could happen. One, we have a large percentage of parents make the decision that they're going to remain remote for an amount of time. We could bring all the other students in, and or we decide that we're going to open for all and be very clear on what we can offer so parents can make decisions. For example, we can limit interactions and limit transitions. We believe we can provide, 4 feet of social distancing with these barriers and with these masks, and just be very upfront with our parents about what that is, and then bring everyone in. That's a very complex, almost an ethical decision and question that we need to wrestle with. When you think about potential guidance being 6 feet, and do we provide an environment in which that doesn't exist? But those are the 2 paths to having all students in. And I will tell you, districts are all over the place. Somebody asked about what are other districts doing. I would say that Franklin County superintendents that I talk to, they're pretty consistent in their going hybrid for sure, because we're going to honor these suggestions or recommendations, whatever the word is. There are districts here locally that are just saying, our parents want our kids back and we're just bringing them in, and we're going to do the best we can with with the space we have. So the districts are all over the place with that decision.
Bob, can you touch on teachers' input into our plans so far?
So we had, and we didn't include that slide. So every building had a design team, and I don't know what the exact number, that was involved in that. I would say it was a significant number of staff that provided input into the plans that came forward. Now, changes were made even with what came out of buildings, because there needed to be consistent throughout the district. So, one of the things, for example, with the Cuyahoga and Geauga kind of thinking was you'd have your older siblings off during, if you had multiple kids in the district and you had an older sibling that was able to watch or help with childcare in the afternoons when they're home, that we align that. So we did have to make some modifications due to alignment, certainly. But I think, in terms of engagement involvement, we've tried, with the time frame we've had, to involve as many people as possible.
Bob, if we move forward with an all-in model, are we going to have a waiver or things like that for students who choose that model?
I would imagine that, we have a waiver right now for students participating in athletics. I would imagine that would exist. We haven't gone that far with it. I would imagine, and probably if, folks that are interested, I imagine the July 8th meeting would be worth watching the July 8th Board of Education meeting, because we're gonna wrestle with some of these questions and make some decisions at that meeting regarding some of that.
I'm scrolling through. I don't see anything that we have not yet touched on. If anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question, we can handle that. Oh, all right, hang on, Melanie, 1 second. All right, Melanie, go ahead and unmute and you should be good.
Yeah, one thing I didn't see on the page was support. If parents are helping to educate their students at home, what are the plans for supporting parents in that?
So when we make final decisions on this, we have been working also on a parent support guide that we will release whenever the model is released, that does provide recommendations and support. I would say that I think the elementary has created it in a way that students should be able to be pretty self-sufficient, unlike maybe what we experienced in the spring with what they have to do, because we realize, regardless of the model, some of these kids are going to be in daycares, and they need to have the ability to do kind of the work independent enough to do some of the work on their own. So, I would imagine iReady pathways, things of that nature.
Hey, Bob, can you speak to masks? I know that we're going to talk about it in the survey, but a question did come up in there.
Yeah, so this is, I think for some people, this is a defining piece for whether they come or not. Again, it's hard for me to say without knowing that are these mandates that they have to wear masks? Do we have to make a local decision? I will tell you the survey is phrased in a way where we ask you if students were required to wear masks or face shields. We've had some initial conversations with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health on potentially face shields. I would have a model here, but I don't think I want to put that on. Would you still come to school? We also asked the question if we had mask or face shields on the bus and during heavy transitions, but off in the classroom, would you come? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that's an important issue. I'll use you, Mike Doherty. We had these face masks and Mike took one home for his kindergartner to try on just to see and get a reaction. And it's probably a video you should release because it could go viral. The reality of a kindergartner keeping on a mask or a face shield at all times, I just don't think it's realistic. I think we can do the best job we can, continue to remind them, but it becomes very difficult very quick.
Bob, I wanted to jump in. I wanted to jump in for a second. In the chat, it was asked about whether or not there would be full virtual teachers available to provide instruction. One step of this process is going to be having families express their choice for their instructional model. If a parent, once we know that information and we know how many families are choosing an all remote model, we then will know how to staff that model appropriately. So if you choose a full remote model, you're not going to, as a parent, be fully responsible. There will be teachers assigned to that remote learning model. It's just until we know exactly how many students at each level, we don't know if it will be one teacher per building or multiple per grade level. So all of that information and all those plans will evolve as we start to get some commitments from families.
Yeah, and to be clear, the survey, I mentioned this earlier, is not your commitment. It's your best decision on what we can, the information we can share with you now. We will have to come back in July and ask every parent, okay, what do you want to do for the first 9 weeks here? Where do you want to go? Because we need to lock all of that information down.
We have one more hand up. Marla, did you want to ask your question? I know that we already addressed the question on masks, but did you want to unmute and ask your question?
I did, because I just wanted it to be kind of so the people who are listening can hear, and mine's more about Excel Tech. So many kids in high school are off campus, or if they go to the Performing Arts Academy, are on campus for half of the day for the Excel Tech model. And I just kind of wanted to see how that would work with this half-day hybrid thing. Thanks.
Yeah, so great question, Marlo. I met with the Excel Tech superintendents last week. Everyone is committed to offering all of their programs, so that's good news. No one it kind of deems it not feasible. In fact, those are probably the most feasible because they have a lot of square footage in those programs. So they've got larger spaces. We will be able to obviously send kids to those programs, receive kids in the performing arts. The only conflict, we have identified a few conflicts on the half day that you're in to make sure you get your credits, and we will just work through those with students. I think we have like 36 students in Excel Tech programs, and there was a handful of kids we had to work through. So there should not be a disruption from an Excel Tech standpoint.
All right, we're down to the last 2 minutes. Just scrolling through to see if there's any other questions that we didn't hit. I don't know, did you have any parting words, Dr. Hunt? I think we've got all the questions. I'm not seeing anything we missed, but there's a lot of questions on here, so I apologize if I missed you.
Does anyone else have a question? Just go ahead and raise your hand. But I would, I guess, end where I began. I want to thank all of our parents for kind of leaning into the conversation here. Again, I'm going to ask for your help to get as many people as we can into this survey because numbers matter in terms of what we can offer. I also appreciate the amount of support parents were able to provide to help us through the spring. I want to thank the administrative staff for their work over the last couple of weeks in getting this to a point where at least we can start the conversation with our community, and certainly our teaching staff that did a tremendous job throughout the spring, and those that participated and gave input in these models. I do want you to know these are evolving. Please, keep that message as you talk to other people. The feedback that you provide is going to help, guide what the next iteration looks like, and we'll continue to communicate and talk internally to get to the best possibly place we can. I have a household with 2 working people and an autoimmune compromised son. I know the pressure this is putting on families to think through how this might work for you. So I get it, and we're certainly taking that into consideration. So any hands, Mike? Any other questions?
No, I think we're good.
All right. I want to thank you all for coming on today. We will do 2 more of these, pretty similar in structure and format. And if I haven't mentioned the survey next week, that will come out to you on Wednesday. All right. Thank you all very much for tuning in. And for those of you who are watching on live stream, we are very, very fortunate to have such engaged parents that have an interest in their child's education. Thank you so much.